Afternoon. It is afternoon tea at 3 with Father Lewis and me. Well, hope you're both. Let me start again.
You're both.
We're looking forward to having two people online. It's because I saw the number 2 there. That's what it is. We hope that those
We
of
don't
you
have
who
anybody tuned in yet.
it says 2 there,
Oh,
but I don't know what it means. Oh, no, that's the thing that says we have people. The eye, the all-knowing eye.
oh, how many eyes?
We have 2 people. So I was right.
Sign
For those
in,
of
please.
you who've just logged on, there are 2 people. Welcome. As soon as I started this, I said, "Welcome to you both. I'm psychic."
Well, yeah. There are other things that we could call you besides psychic.
Maybe. Anyway, welcome to Afternoon Tea. We hope you are all well and staying safe, and that you're not succumbing to the weather. We had big storms yesterday, so I hope everything's okay with you. Good afternoon, Karen. It's good to have you here with us, and thank you for sharing this time. We are still working on Sermon of the Mount, and it is week 4. Hi from St. Clement's. And
Bill
hi, Bill.
Ingalls.
Hi, Bill. You are here. You are here. Oh, you are there, and we're here. It gets complicated.
We're talking about words today, so
Yes. So
we're a
we're
little
starting
crazy.
off well. Right. So let me just recap what we've done these past 3 weeks, because we have taken something of a journey. Week 1, we looked at what it means to be. Who am I? What's it all about? How have I come to be me? And what are the component parts that have created, culture, language, being born at a certain place in a certain time, being influenced by certain things, etc., etc. And so when I look at things, what interpretations am I doing between what I see or hear and what my brain makes sense of? And then what biases do I have? St. Clement's kit. Oh, I just have to change the setting. Hello,
St.
Kit.
Clement's kit.
Yeah. Welcome. With a tongue sticking out. I know that feeling very well. Right, so that was week 1. Week 2 was to do with the Greco-Roman world and its philosophies, and we introduced the Jewish philosophical view. So we had virtue, and then we had wisdom, and how these kind of follow each other. Hi, Anne. And then what happens was that the kind of aim of the the Greco-Roman world was to wisdom and fulfillment through personal achievement, whereas the source of all wisdom and goodness, etc., in the Judeo viewpoint was God Himself. And then what did we do last week?
We've been at this so long, I can't remember.
Hi, Holly. Yeah, it's the ultimate brain fart, really, isn't it?
Yeah.
We did something last week, and it's led us to this point. So this week, we're looking at words and the word meanings. Now, you will need your Bibles, especially you need to have 2 markers for Psalm 1, verse 1, Psalm 2, verse 12, and what is it, Matthew 5.
Matthew 5.
So if you want to do that while I Twitter on, feel free. Now, what are we looking at? Words and meanings. Why? Well, because the way in which a word is translated is limited by our knowledge of ancient texts. And what I'm talking about here is the translation of words from ancient texts, from ancient languages. But what happens is, as we learn more about ancient texts, our translation of certain words evolves. And at the same time, this is something we forgot to mention, is that our language evolves as well. So what we might have meant as by a word just a few years ago may now be different as to our understanding of that word now.
It's like the word ghost and spirit in the old prayer book.
Yeah, and the kind of modern lingo you mentioned, it's sick when they mean it's good.
Yeah.
I mean, that's kind of a bit out there, but it's still there. Good afternoon, Jeannie. Right, so when it comes to Jesus and the Sermon on the Mount, this is definitely the case. The words that we have, Now, sometimes the English language is the limiting factor. For example, the New Testament Greek uses 3 different words to define what we describe with one word, and that word is love. Each New Testament Greek word for love brings a specific and unique flavor to it. And we're going to just look at 2 of the most common ones because you've probably heard of these. And we have different ways to pronounce it because I'm English.
And I pronounce it correctly.
So there you go. Agape.
Agape.
Agape. Agape. Potato. Potato. This means unconditional love, preferential love. This is a love that is chosen and acted out by the will. It's a benevolent love that always seeks the good of the beloved. Then there's philios, which is friendship, fondness, affection, delight, personal attachment. Filio is a word about feeling. Feelings. I didn't know I was going there.
I didn't either.
Oh dear.
It's not in the script.
Oh, I'm going red, I can tell. Whereas agape is a matter of benevolence, duty, and commitment. So feelings versus benevolence, duty, and commitment. We are commanded to have agape, not philios, love, because feelings cannot be commanded. Now, Jesus asked Peter if he had agape love, but Peter responded that he had philios love. Good afternoon, Father Bill. Just think about how much we miss when all we see is the word love in our Bibles. Just think about that. Which one is it? What's being meant here? Now, today we'll be looking at words that we feel we know very well, but the truth is otherwise. Now, I'm going to introduce you to a word that you may have heard of, but maybe haven't. And that word is, and it's what I want you to learn this, is Macarism. M-A-C-A-R-I-S-M. A Macarism is a pronouncement based on observation. That is a certain way of being in the world that produces human flourishing and happiness. And yes, this does hark back to weeks 1 and 2.
And I think maybe you need to know that the Macarism or Macare is translated in the Sermon on the Mount as
Well, we get there.
blessed.
We will get there.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right.
This is a hidden thing we reveal.
Oh,
All right. Now, Macarisms are really widespread throughout the ancient world, within Judaism and outside of Judaism. And our Sermon on the Mount begins with a strong series of Macarisms. Now, that is the easy part. We spent hours and hours and hours yesterday trying to get this as easy as we could. I'm sure we failed, but we're trying.
yeah.
Or we are trying. Yes.
Yes.
Whatever way you want to interpret that. Right, and the problem is that we have certain words in the Sermon on the Mount that are Macarisms, but the words we've used to translate them aren't, which makes them lose their meaning. And it gets worse. We have no words to provide easy translations into English. What if we told you the word you know as blessed or blessed can be translated in the Australian version of the Bible as good on you, or in the Welsh version, Gwyn I byd, which translates into white is their world, or as a Welsh priest poet once wrote, may their world be lit light. This is the word we translate as blessed. Australian, good on you, and Welsh, may their world be lit light. I love that. It's kind of beautiful. That's how far from accurate the word blessed or blessed is. What makes it even worse is that when we hear or read the word blessed, we immediately think of God as coming down to us to do something good. But that is not what is meant. What's wrong here? Well, listen to this tortuous sentence. The word we have as blessed comes to us by way of a Hebrew word translated into an early and sophisticated version of Common Greek, then translated into a later truck driver version of Common Greek, and then translated into English by way of the Latin Vulgate translation. It's a bit of a mess. So let's get some context. Again, I'm going to say this isn't easy, but I do hope it's meaningful.
If you'll turn to Psalm 1 and the first verse, and then Psalm 2, verse 12, I'm going to describe the Old Testament concepts. The Old Testament cares about human flourishing. It communicates this in a number of ways and with a number of concepts. The largest of these is probably the idea of shalom. We know that word and kind of translate it as peace, but it has other deeper and broader meanings. In the Hebrew Bible, an important concept that goes along with shalom, communicating human flourishing, is the word asher. You need to explain this.
Okay. Me and Hebrew, we don't. We're as far apart as can possibly be. So every time I mispronounced
asher,
I just went, rah. So,
and then he continues to do it every time I say something kind of like a Hebrew word.
rah.
The Hebrew word asher is an abstract noun, and one that is always followed by a connection with who is being described as asher, blessed. Asher is the one who. The etymological roots of this word have been debated, but it seems like it could mean, from ancient Semitic and Egyptian roots, prosperity, good luck, and happiness. There's a twofold usage of asher in the Psalms, in Psalm 1 and 2, that sets the tone for its frequent use in the Psalms. Blessed, happy, flourishing is the man.
That's 1-1.
Blessed, happy, flourishing are all who take refuge in him.
And that's 2 and the second part of verse 12.
These statements can serve as a model for the usage of asher throughout the Psalms. Asher is used 23 times in the Psalms, combining the wisdom and devotional sides of the word, namely obedience to the Torah,
which is what the first 3 verses of Psalm 1
Psalm
are
1,
about,
and the reverent worship of the Lord alone,
which is what verses 10 to 12 of Psalm 2 are about.
In the Psalms, the truly happy one is the one whose God is Yahweh. Thus, asher refers to true happiness and flourishing within the gracious covenant God has given. Like prophetic literature, the Psalms offer the promise of flourishing and happiness, that is, fertility, prosperity, security, through faithfulness to the Lord, the very thing that the wicked promise apart from the Lord. As with us, there was a struggle going on in Israel about which way to live, and the Psalms played an important part in creating a vision of the only path to true flourishing. Now we're going to kind of jump to the New Testament, which will, if you look at Matthew 5, you will see the beginning of the Beatitudes. And when we turn to the New Testament, we see that the same idea continues with the Greek equivalent to asher, which is the word makarios.
Which is where we get macarism from.
As with any Greek word in the New Testament, there's a dual context. There's the meaning of the Greco-Roman world, the way it was commonly used in language, and then there was the long-standing tradition of how that particular word or a particular word was used in the Greek Old Testament, the Septuagint. To understand how a Greek term or concept is used in the New Testament, one must recognize that not only the normal daily usage of the speaker is at play, but also the deep and prominent influence of the Jewish heritage as manifested in the Septuagint. When we consider this dual concept for the frequent occurrence of Makarios in the New Testament, we can see how Asher and Shalom, traditions of human, you forgot your
Oh, I did, yeah.
yeah,
Rah.
there were two of them.
Rah.
First, the transitional or the translational relationship between Asher and Makarios is quite exceptional. It's very rare that in translating the Septuagint, the Septuagint translation of Hebrew scripture, could find a close word that stood for both, or a Greek word that stood for the Hebrew equivalent. But there is, in this, Asher has a very direct correlation to Makarios.
So yeah, the Asher and Makarios, they're almost identical within their own languages. So if you understood one, you understood the other one quite clearly.
They mean basically the same thing.
Yeah.
When translations were made, usually the Greek would have to use several words to identify a concept from Hebrew. Second, classical Greek word makar was a common word referring first to the state of the gods, and secondarily to human beings who live a life of happiness that is like that of the gods, meaning that their lives are beyond care, beyond labor, and beyond death. And there was a close connection in terms of ideas and concepts.
So that's harking back to week 2. You see how the philosophical links come together here.
Returning to the discussion of the problem with the English translation word blessed, there's another Hebrew-Greek word pairing that we have translated into English with one word: blessed, blessed. This is a frequently occurring Hebrew word, barach, and barakah.
What am I need to do then?
And in regular Septuagint Greek, eulogio and eulogetos. The result is a confusion for us.
Remember, those are two sets of words which
They're
have different
closely
meanings,
parallel.
but we've translated them all under the word blessed.
The word baruch, eulogio, is something that happens from God above to us below. Sanctification that is bestowed within the context of a relationship with God. This is contrast with Asher and Makarios, which is an observational statement about the person who lives according to the Torah, or in the New Testament, Matthew, one who lives in the kingdom of heaven.
We saw a nice little stick figure graph of this, where there's a little person, and then the one, the blessing coming from above is the what's it the bruh.
Oh, baruch.
And then the observational one of somebody we see as being blessed is the other one, the Makarios.
Yeah, Makarios. Asherisms and Makarios, Macarisms are wisdom literature. Blessings are covenantal language. Now, Father was going off, and you probably didn't hear that, so I'm going to do it again. Asherisms, Macarisms are wisdom literature. Blessings are covenantal language. So there's a separation of these two concepts. Confusion over the distinction between Asher and Makarios and Baruch and Egologitas contributes to the failure to see that the former pair of terms communicates the idea of human flourishing and well-being. Herein lies the greatest problem of translating all these terms with the same expression, blessed, blessed. The English term blessed is so heavenly loaded with the narrower sense of divine favor, something that's coming down from heaven, that the sense of the human flourishing is almost always lost. Now, this is hard stuff to kind of get your head around, so let's have an example. Verse 1 of wisdom-oriented Psalm 1 says, "Blessed is the one who." What is being communicated in this is the person who delights in God's revelatory word and walks in the way revealed by God's word receives God's favor. Unfortunately, many, if not most, of us will interpret this verse to mean, if you do this, read the Bible, God will bless you. It becomes a transactional rather than a relational.
Magic, almost.
Yeah, almost like magic. What is actually, and this is actually opposite of what the meaning is. Psalm 1 is not making a claim about God's favor, blessing, or barakah at all. Rather, it's an inspirational vision for the wise way of being in the world that will result in what humans desire human flourishing. It is a poetic, crafted form of implicit invitation to consider what the best way of being in the world is and to pursue it. Psalm 1 is a wisdom psalm that has long played a central role in Christian faith. It is like the wisdom literature, such as the book of Proverbs, a vision of human flourishing that is meant to effect change in people's lives by inspiring them to do good and the benefits that come from living a certain way. This is a powerful, imaginative call to be a certain way in the world, not just because God demands it, nor out of a Kantian altruism, doing the right thing, you do the right thing and that's enough, nor out of a mechanistic tit-for-tat view of God. If you read your Bible and don't hang around with bad people, then God will bless you. But rather, this is based on the appeal to human flourishing for one's own sake. Would you rather be a fruit-bearing tree or rejected chaff? Would you rather flourish, be happy, that is, a share, or face judgment? The answer is obvious, and thus the wise person will avoid the deceptive company of the wicked and instead orient his or her life around God's revelation. Now we need to move on to Jesus and how we are to understand what he is saying in the Sermon on the Mount. And to do that, we need to look now at the word blessed as it's used in Matthew's Gospel. The first thing to note about Matthew's use of makarios is that as opposed to a blessing, it is important to recall that what one would expect as a contrast to a macarism would be a curse. But what we actually get is woe.
So, like, if you say you bless someone, what's the opposite of blessing somebody? It's cursing somebody. So if blessing is the correct word, then if Jesus is going to talk about the opposites later on, which he does, then we would expect the word curse, but we don't get the word woe instead, W-O-E.
There's a question there?
Yes. Since we're discussing, thanks Bill, since we're discussing Greek and Hebrew translations into English and how the differences change or affect our understanding of the word, since Christ likely spoke Aramaic, is there yet another translation challenge into the Greek or Hebrew? How accurate is that? The answer is yes and no. It's It is yes, because Christ did speak Aramaic. It's no, because we have very few actual words that have come through to us, which are direct lineage from Jesus. So what we have is a transcription of the sayings of Jesus. So, and we're never going to get any further than that. So it's yes. The no comes because we deal with the text that we have, and there are assumptions behind those texts that we have to make. What we're dealing with here is that Chinese whispers problem of how what was written down in the text and was understood by those around would have has shifted because of how many times it's been retranslated in our own language. If that does that make any sense?
Yeah,
Kind of.
It's like the red words in the New Testament.
Yeah.
Those are supposed to be Jesus' words. What they actually are is the evangelist, the apostle who's writing this down, his remembrance of what Jesus has said and kind of putting it into a context that makes sense for his hearers.
What you alluded to last week causes one to consider that the Bible seems to be more a paraphrase. You could say that, but I think we need to remember that within the Jewish faith, well, within any of the ancient faiths in the early days, they had a phenomenal folk memory. So it could be, this is me backtracking a bit, I think. It could be that we did have a whole bunch of the sayings of Jesus very, very accurately written down. But obviously, because of the differences of the language, and so I wouldn't say it was a paraphrase. I mean, we know enough about modern languages now. I'm reading a book in English that's a Japanese book. It's not a paraphrase; it's a translation. So it is that it's kind of subtle, the difference there, but we're working with original languages that are then written down. So original language that's then has an oral tradition that's then written into another language. Yeah, it's not easy. It is confusing, to say the least. Do I mean, the suggestion could be that means that anybody could have written anything about, but the book translation is more literal as compared to the word of mouth. Oh yeah, and it always is going to be.
You need to say what the question,
all right,
the statement is.
So Bill says, yeah, but the book translation, see me reading the English version of a Japanese book, is more literal as compared to word of mouth.
Well, I think you have to remember that the ancient cultures had this very, very strong tradition of the oral tradition, things that were told and repeated over and over again. And there might have been some slight change, but basically that oral tradition was passed down from generation to generation with very little change. Mm-hmm. It's not like how we think about, modern gossip. It had more substance in sense of it was a way of telling the story. If you think about the Iliad, the Odyssey, they were first expressed in oral tradition. They were stories told by mouth, and then they were written down.
Yeah, it's if you've ever been to a madrasa, where you see the kind of history of how the Quran's been passed on, these kids learn it by heart, and it becomes self-correcting in the group. I mean, I mentioned earlier about Chinese whispers, but this is the kind of exact opposite, because if one person gets it wrong, the others in the group will say, well, no, it wasn't that, it was that. The problems start really when it gets written down, because there's one person with one manuscript who then may editorialize it, or somebody writes a note in the side that this made me laugh when I first read this. And then it gets added to the text. Jesus said, blah, blah, blah. And this made me laugh when I read this. So it's a fascinating history in itself. And thanks, Bill, for bringing it up. And we love sidetracks, rabbit holes. So we were wondering how many we'd go down today. And we got down one at least. Yay! This has been really, really good fun. It's been really hard work, and we disagree a lot of the time, which is why we have to come up with a text. Otherwise, you just see two people bickering, and you'd wonder what they were talking about. So, yeah, the text is to try and keep us on the straight and narrow.
To go back and kind of encapsulate, we need to look now at the word blessed or blessed as it's used in Matthew.
Yes.
First thing to note is Matthew's use of makarios is that as opposed to a blessing. It is important to recall that the one who would expect as a contrast to a macarism would be a curse, but it's actually a woe. Yeah. Jesus says, woe are those who. The second thing to note is that Matthew, the makarios one, is the one who is not offended at the arrival and behavior of Jesus.
Now, we put that in because later on, as we go through the Sermon on the Mount, we'll be talking about it being both a present-day reality and a future reality. But the first thing that Matthew talks about here is the fact that Jesus is here, some are willing to listen, and this is a new state of being for those who are listening. It's not done by God. It is something that these people, the disciples, are approaching because Jesus is the master, the rabbi.
Now, there's a third thing to note, that in Matthew, Jesus says that the person who does, sees, and hears, and listens, and obeys is the one who can be described as makarios, as experiencing true and full life, because of that person's alignment with Jesus' teachings. The final thing to note in Matthew, Jesus proclaims that Simon Peter is makarios for being the recipient of God's revelation. Jesus does not pronounce a blessing on Peter for having this revelation. He is saying that Peter's ability to see is the state of flourishing, or, if you will, the blessedness. It is an ascription, not a promise or a blessing. This particular text is a prime example of the nuance necessary to understand makarios eugologitos relationship. Jesus is not pronouncing or effecting a blessing on Peter, but he is declaring that the state of flourishing is upon those who are recipients of God's ultimate blessing, the revelation of Jesus himself being
the blessing.
The blessing.
It's kind of weird, isn't it? So we, being two reasonable people, tried to come up with various words. And all we discovered was that every time we tried to find a word that would cover all the Hebrew and Greek bases of the original, all we're doing is providing synonyms. The synonyms that still covered our original problematic word, blessed.
Is that like a synonym
bun? Yeah, with cinnamon.
Yeah, okay.
With plenty of synonym in it.
Oh,
yeah.
Good, yeah.
But now, why is this a problem? Well, if you look at an Amplified Bible, it gets really weird. Because we looked at this, we thought, we have a way of escaping this mess. Go thou to an Amplified Bible, which gives you a billion different definitions.
And readeth it from it.
Yes, and it was an absolute mess, because not only did it sort of give you a bunch of words that replaced the word blessing, it then shifted the original Greek of what was being said by Jesus to fit in the synonyms they've used, which is barking mad. And the other problem is that the words that we came up with still had that top-down problem, that God was doing something. God's grace was being imparted and blessing rather than the observational thing of what happens in one's life if one attempts to live the life of Jesus. In other words, be a disciple. And so we thought we'd try something else. And we thought we'd try this because of all people, Alexa, you know, the Amazon machiney thingy that listens to you. She went all Yoda on us the other day. I can't remember what it was about, but she did a Yoda statement. And now, explain a Yoda statement, please. Explain Yoda statement.
I think the best one, please. I was driving in San Francisco, returning from a music festival, and I saw this sign, and it was for a financial company, and it said, "Bankruptcy confusing, it makes all."
So yeah, Yoderism is the use of a sentence, then breaking it into different things.
And putting in the word order is strange.
Mm-hmm. So we tried to think of phrases that we could use with words which would really show what this Makarios word really was, and we couldn't find any. The best we came up with, and shout out to Carol Shellerman here, is an Anglo-American English amalgam. Brilliantly awesome, or awesomely brilliant. So brilliantly awesome is the person, etc., etc. Or, if you want to be really modern, cool is the dude. I like that one.
I do too.
Yeah, cool is the dude. Now, this is kind of weird because we're not doing too bad for time, so hopefully you've got a whole bunch of questions, or you've already run away from your computers and left them running, because we still have people watching. So what we want you to get out of today's meeting, and we really do want you to get something out of this, is this. Whenever you hear or read the word blessed, you immediately want to put that word into its correct context, the original Hebrew and or Greek context. And there's only two contexts, so it's not as if you're going to have to do a lot of work. The first context is this top-down blessing from God, which sanctifies through a relationship with him. The second one is this Makarios observation. What is it being written? Is it an observation of someone whom we see as flourishing within the goal of God's redeeming work? And within the Sermon on the Mount, it's this Makarios observation that is required for a correct understanding of this sermon. And we'll go into more depth as we start working through the text, which actually will be next week. It's only taken us 5 weeks to get there, which is a record for me, I'm sure. When it's been like, why are we doing this? Says Father Lewis. And I say, because. How long is it going to take? Says Father Lewis. Well, I don't know. But we're here, 5 weeks on, and we'll be moving into the text fully.
One of the things my sister watches QVC, that shopping network on TV. And one time I was sitting there watching with her, and I said to her, "These people can talk about nothing for a long, long time."
I see a future.
Yeah. And at times, with dear Father Andrew, I feel like...
I hope this is not confessions time.
No. It's kind of like watching the QVC channel.
I hope I give better quality items. But wait. This coffee tastes good to the last drop.
Oh, yeah. Tastes good like a cigarette should.
I don't know why coffee tastes like cigarettes.
I don't know why that jumped into my mind yesterday, but it was old commercial.
Ah, okay.
And the use of words. Now, do you have... I'm sure
do you have any questions?
Yeah,
any
there
observations?
must be questions.
You can just put a whole row of question marks and we'll understand As long as you haven't just collapsed on the keyboard and that just happened to hit that key.
Anybody coming through with a question? Now, there will be a test on this next week.
This is a very good example of why sometimes you have to slow pace yourself through a text, even in English, and why it's useful to have more than one version of the Bible as you work through it. Just imagine those people who've only ever touched Scripture through the King James Version. It's beautiful. I mean, I have absolutely nothing bad to say about its beauty and the depth of its writing. It is.
Yeah,
it's the
it's
first
beautiful.
thing. If I need to quote Scripture and have to pull it out of my head, it's my go-to. Thus says the Lord. It's really gorgeous. But for accuracy, no. And what I mean by accuracy is, what were the original thinkers, writers, and players doing and thinking? And that is more important. Now, Bill Ingalls says, I think it would be a great help if you came up with view graphs of these, to me at least, of these esoteric words. Yeah, we were thinking, this is really time consuming. Apart from us meeting on Wednesdays to actually try and work out what we're going to say, we work as individuals on different books. So there's a couple of books on my little amplifier there that I've been using, and he's got a whole bunch at his house that he's using. And yes, we actually do have the ability to stick graphs up. It's just a time constraint, I'm afraid. Plus, are you any good at doing graphs? Because
No.
I know I'm not.
No.
I can type-ish. It's amazing going through this just to see how many typos and grammatical errors there are in that. And I typed it. But yeah, I know what you mean. It would be helpful. Because I'm quite a visual learner as well. And all you're getting thrown at you is words upon words upon words. Yeah.
If you can think about this will be a visual, oral example. Think about a person standing on a hill. And from on top comes the word barakah, baruch, the Hebrew words, and eugologion, the Greek word, which means to bless or consecrate in the sense of how we normally think of the word blessing. And then if you can think about being on the ground with the person, are the words asher and makarios, which are kind of a way of looking at that person and getting...
As if you're pointing to them and saying to somebody else.
Yeah, that person there.
Is. And you can say, we see this blessing. But see what I mean? As soon as you say the word blessing, you suddenly think God's doing something. We see this makarios, this movement within the person that's leading them towards and flourishing.
Next week, when we start talking about the texts themselves,
hopefully that'll clarify a lot of it.
Yeah, there are translations that use words other than blessed.
Father Bill, is it Maxwell House? You'll never know.
Good to the last drop.
You know, I hate Maxwell House, so maybe that's a clue. Yeah, I forgot about that. Yeah, but yes, it's and that's it. That's all this hour is about that one thing. It's to do with
one word,
the provenance of this word within its Hebrew and Greek context, and how we've distorted two completely different meanings with the same word. And one of them is
Asher.
What he does will be a blessing for his future in flourishing, etc. And the other one is he's been blessed by something.
Sanctified by something coming down.
Yeah. So you need those big hands, one going that way,
and one going that way.
You're bleeding, by the way. And
yeah.
See, he's shedding his blood for you on this one. He loves you that much.
Yeah.
Any more questions?
I think there also next week. I just remember one person. I think it was Anne
Let me go and get something for that.
who asked the question weeks ago. What about blessed? Blessed is the one who mourns.
Oh, yes.
And there we have a double problem, because we think of mourning usually as grieving over the death of someone, but that's not what that that beatitude is talking about. So that's something we'll have to go on next. Well,
I'm just laughing at what Vern wrote. But then we have Anne with a far more sensible thing. So Anne says, we can compare what Jesus is saying to Aristotle's saying that practice of virtue leads to... Yes, we can.
yeah,
We most definitely can. In fact, some biblical commentators see such a similarity here that it's as if he's fully aware of the Aristotelian notion of virtue at this point, and he realizes that this Greco-Roman philosophical influence within these Galileans and within these disciples is strong enough that he can utilize this to his advantage to point people not only towards God in this sense of flourishing and the fulfillment of the Torah, and him being the fulfillment, of course, but also through him living it, him being the totality of what it means to live this flourishing life within this Makarios way.
and there is a particular branch in New Testament theology that says the evangelists were so steeped in the Greek world that they actually used literary forms that were being used in Greek literature. For example, there's a thing about I can't remember. I think it has something to do with Homer and the Odyssey, about sitting or going to a lake and sitting in a boat. And the theologian said this is when Jesus sits in the boat on the Sea of Galilee. The author has taken this story from Homer and recast it as Jesus. Now, this is a very, very obtuse theology. Most theologians don't agree with this, but there is this strong influence of Greek words, literature, and ideas that permeates the New Testament.
Well, yeah, there's that famous phrase that you really have to use quite often when you're doing seminars, and that is scholars are divided.
That gets you out of a lot of trouble.
So to Vern, I had the decaf coffee, so I'm hoping we don't use Maxwell House Intense Bold, do we? Really? Please? No? Anyway.
Okay.
Kit, my Bible explains this by reference back to Psalm 1:1 and then to Proverbs 3:13. Yes, they use the same. It defines it as happy are those. No. See, happy is an emotional state of being. It's not something that's moving forward. It's one of those synonyms that we think we can just use to replace something. The Amplified Bible does that. It's happy, blessed, and a few other words, but they're all kind of stationary and feely words rather than something that moves you forward. E.g. Proverbs, yeah. Happy are those who find wisdom, yeah, and those who get understanding. See, that is I'm in this position as being happy now. But it's a moving. Like I say, once we get into the text proper, hopefully it'll clarify things a lot more. And then Father Bill, but Baruch just moved somebody. The Baruchologian is generally used for our praising God. And in Hebrew thought, our praising God for something is a call for him to bless it. I thought he'd written twice, but it's because of the same as Bill and William and William. It's kind of confusing there.
There's an idea about the power of blessing or praising.
Oh, just using words.
And if you remember that from the Psalms, he is enthroned upon the praises of Israel. That power or the idea of action is initiated when we ask God or we praise him, and then he blesses, as Father Bill is saying.
Yeah. It's like going back to last week, whatever we talked about. I do remember what we talked about, bathroom blessings.
Oh, that's true.
Yes.
Because
it's a matter of invocation almost at that point, or invitation is probably a better way of putting it. That you're inviting God into a situation, or you're inviting God to come and allow us to enjoy this in a way. It like you say, as a blessing. So you could say there's almost a third definition that we have of that word there, Father Bill. And William says there is, especially in the Old Testament, a lot of oral myth interwoven in. Oh yeah, again, it's this is back to it's either week one or something I talked about at one of my morning coffees. The Bible is a story to explain why we are as we are, and it's stole from other cultures. And so, yes, there's a lot of oral myth in there. And there's different types of, we've got the Deuteronomist and the priestly lines coming into the early books of the Old Testament, which are trying to describe the same thing in a different way. So that's where you get the two different creation stories. And it's, so Bill, the Bible she's using is Oxford.
But
so it's got to be one of the best.
Revised standard version. Which revised?
They're a printing press. I don't know what the version is, but yeah, some interesting things come out of Oxford.
And then Anne.
Yeah, Anne says, but I can't help but feel a strong should, because Jesus is saying it. His statements set the norm. And then, is she writing something else? Maybe not. Well, when we get there, we will see, that what Jesus is actually saying. For the time being, right, we're not sort of being mysterious just for effect. It's just that we start the Oxford NRSV. Yeah. I have problems with the NRSV, I'm afraid to say, even if it did come from Oxford. But that's another matter.
And then Bill asked the question.
Bill said, but did he really say it? I think we can, I feel pretty certain that he did.
Yeah,
because of the oral traditions.
I think that the Sermon on the Mount is a literary form.
Scholars are divided as to whether he did sit down and say the whole thing as a piece, or
this is
Matthew
a collection
and Luke had these oral traditions, and then they used them and put them into their own books in a way that suited how they wanted to present the gospel of Jesus Christ to the people to whom they were writing the gospel. Because even that has its own context. Yeah, and this is why I like theology. It's so simple.
Oh, now we're getting all kinds of stuff.
Bung, bung. Hey, Paula. Hola. Just landed, but we'll watch the replay. My apologies. Had to be stay. Oh, good to have you here. Will write into their own words. Oh, yeah. Well, we do that all the time. Are Constantine's words?
No. the texts were
They were around long before
Yeah.
Constantine.
long before.
Yeah, I mean the early church had this huge. You got to remember that one of the reasons nothing would be written down is because of the depth of oral tradition in Judaism. They all believed Jesus was going to turn up
Next
within
week.
a minute. And why waste your time? Paul talks about this. Why get a mortgage? Why get married? Why do this, that, and the other? Because Jesus is a coming. It was only when within I don't know 50 years or less really. I'm talking about
less.
40 AD, 50 AD. These things got written down, and but the oral memory would have been pretty fresh. So I'm pretty. Although yes, we are getting a translation. We're getting it from an Aramaic into a Greek, and yes, it's been shifted in. Well, some scholars would say it's been shifted to places for effect for the audience to which the people were writing. To whom? Why do we keep saying which? The people were writing. And so there's a kind of, if you want to call it a political agenda going on, you can do. But there would still have been enough people around to remember the oral tradition. And that would have, I think, yeah, you have to go to a madrasa to sort of just see how quickly it's not a hive mind, but when people learn to repeat something, learn it by rote, and they have that kind of mind which we no longer possess. We can barely do rote for 2 and 2 are 4 now. Then as soon as somebody says something that's wrong, the group corrects it immediately, and it's like having. I'm going to go computer there, but I'm not going to go down there. But it's really impressive.
It's an autocorrect.
Yeah, it's incredibly impressive. All right, so yeah, Bill, it is a difficult, but I love this. It's a really interesting topic for me. Kit, does joy have a place in this discussion? I think of joy as an active state, not a passive one. Exactly. Yes, it
But I
does.
think you have to be careful. Joy and happiness are not the same thing.
So I can agree with themes. It's the specific words that I struggle with. Well, yeah, I mean, this is a problem with English translations. I wonder. I was talking to Father Lewis yesterday about, because he has some German in him, and so he speaks German to a certain
Kind
extent. Can you read it as well?
A little bit.
A little bit. And I would love to see how and learn about what struggles other languages have. English is such a mongrel language. It's picked from here, it's picked from there, and we've got Latin in there. We've still got we've got Norse and French and German and Flemish and
Welsh.
Welsh. Welsh is a drink, and the Welsh would kill you if they hear that. We'll edit that bit out just to calm the Welsh down. They are known to riot at the drop of a hat or a leak. So yes, it's the worry is more for me is to do with the English translations more than anything else. And I'd love to know what it would be like in another language that is far more precise. And I believe German is quite a precise language, isn't it?
Yeah.
And what they do. It's really interesting. But just to recap once more, when you read the word blessed, put it in context. What is being said here? And we chose those examples on purpose. Blessed is the man who's doing the talking. Blessed is the one who's doing the talking. Somebody talking about that
Someone
person.
else.
And what happens within this blessedness. Whereas the other one is that God comes from above and does something which we call a blessing.
I was listening to a Greek. He was a Greek teacher and talking about reading the New Testament in Greek. and reading the New Testament in a translation. And he said, and being a musician, this example really, really stuck with me. He said, reading the New Testament in translation is like listening to the Brandenburg concertos played on a harmonica. You kind of get the melody, you get the harmonic structure, but you're not really getting the whole thing, because it's much more complex and more colorful than that harmonica playing. And when I think about translation, that is the problem. That's the problem for translating anything Japanese into English or whatever.
And we were talking about, before we started today, we talked about Latin and how, it's supposed to be a unifying language within, say, the Roman Church, which is now very much using Latin again in the Mass. But one of the problems they had was it the 60s for the Vatican II, is that someone would come up from another country, from a country, and they would speak to the assembled people, sorry about that, and they would speak in Latin. And the other people wouldn't be able to understand, because their version of Latin, with their accent and everything, was different from other people's versions.
And there's an example.
It's a bit like English and American, isn't it?
Say that word again.
Which one?
Latin.
Latin.
Yeah, but in American English, it's Latin. There's no T in it.
You do that a lot, though. I mean,
yeah, but I mean that's an example of the difficulty, even speaking the same language, what a little bit of water does for a difference in pronunciation.
Water. Yeah, that's
water.
Yeah. If I'm in a restaurant, and we're over time now, so this is the last little aside. If I'm in a restaurant and they say, "What would you like to drink?" and I say, "Water, please," most waiting staff will just stare at me. So I will say, "Water." Then I'll recollect where I am, and I'll say, "Water." And a D instead of a T and an overpronounced R, water, and they go, "Oh, okay." So it's really weird.
I have a friend who she's from Nice, France, and she plays in the Sarasota Orchestra, but lives in St. Pete. And when I would play with Sarasota, sometimes we would travel together, and when we would leave a performance or a rehearsal, we'd stop we called it Chez McDonald, to get something to drink, and she would very precisely say, "I would like a bottle of water." And you would hear this long silence on the other side of the microphone, and then you'd hear, "What?" And so we got her to learn to pronounce the word water. Water. "I want a bottle of water." And then she was understood.
Weird, isn't it? Anyway, we must go and leave you to get on with your day. Excuse me. Thank you for joining us. Paula, how much did Greek Latin shred the meaning just by itself? Excuse me, you're going to have to watch the preceding hour. So thank you very much for staying with us. We do hope you've gotten something out of this. Oh, I just used an Americanism. Gotten. You don't say that in English. You just got. I hope you got something out of this. But please stay safe. Keep us in your prayers, and you will be in ours. And until Sunday, we hope we see you at the driving communion. Otherwise, next Tuesday, and then next Thursday with Father Lewis. God
Good
bless.
afternoon.